Boldwood presents New Hope for the Clark's Factory Girls, written by May Ellis and read by Catherine Press. Ulverscroft and Boldwood present New Hope for the Clark's Factory Girls, written by May Ellis and read by Catherine Press. Chapter 1. June 1917. The hammering on the front door woke both Kate Davis and her landlady, Betty Searle, from their deep sleep. The two of them met outside their bedroom doors, each pulling on dressing gowns over their nightclothes. "Whoever can it be, making such a racket at this time of the night?" grumbled the older woman, as the noise, which had ceased for a moment, started up again. "I peeped out of my window, Auntie," said Kate. "It's some young lad." She'd looked because she'd been afraid it was her pa, drunk and belligerent as usual, come to cause more embarrassment to her. "Do you want me to go down and tell him to go away?" Auntie Betty tightened the belt of her dressing gown and shook her head. "We'll both go down and see him off. Come on, lass. The sooner we shut him up, the quicker we can get back to our beauty sleep." She led the way down the stairs in the dark, then stopped to light a lamp before flinging the door open. The lad who had been hammering on it staggered, nearly falling through the doorway before he was able to catch himself and step back. "You'd better have a jolly good excuse to be rousing folks at this time of the night, young man, or I'll box your ears," she said. "What on earth are you thinking?" The lad gulped at the two women's fierce expressions. "Sorry, missus, but the constable sent me. Reggie Davis's house is on fire. He said you should come straight away." "Oh, my word," gasped Kate. "What on earth has he done now?" "It's a proper blaze it is," said the lad. "The whole street is awake and trying to put the flames out, else it spreads to the other cottages. You'd better come quick." When Kate would have rushed out the door after the lad, Auntie Betty grabbed her arm to stop her. "Go on and tell them she's coming," she told the lad, "but she'll not be running through the village in her nightgown." The lad nodded and ran off as she shut the door and turned to Kate. "Are you all right, lass? Because you don't have to go, you know. Reggie Davis has long since lost any right to expect any consideration from you." Kate agreed. He had been a cruel father who had become worse when her dear ma had died. The woman he'd moved into the family home shortly after, referred to by Kate and her friends as the floozy, had been even worse, attacking and mistreating Kate, and even encouraging her horrible children to do the same. Kate had been forced to endure it until her older brothers had heard about it and rescued her. She'd lived with Auntie Betty, her ma's oldest friend, ever since, but that hadn't stopped Pa and the floozy and their wild offspring from abusing her in the streets if she wasn't quick enough to get out of their paths. "I know, Auntie," she said, "but the constable sent the lad to get me. I should go round, shouldn't I? And he is my pa, whether he deserves the title or not." She sighed and nodded. "You're right, lass, but I'll not let you go on your own. Let's get dressed and we'll go together." The village of Street seemed eerily quiet as they made their way from their home in the Mead to the Davis family home in Silver Road. As they got closer to their destination, however, they began to hear the shouts of people and the roar of the fire. They could see the glow in the sky before they turned into the road. Kate groaned as she saw the crowd of people around her father's house, which was an inferno. It was rented from Clark's, where she and her pa worked. She wondered how he'd talk his way out of this one. It was a miracle he still had any work after he'd been sacked last year for being drunk at his station in the clicking room. He'd ruined a perfectly good hide of leather, which was already in short supply on account of the war. This was the last in a long line of mistakes he'd made while in his cups. He'd been out of work for a couple of months before he managed to persuade Clark's to take him back on, rather than let him end up in the workhouse, although that fate was no more than he deserved, in Kate's opinion. How he talked his way back into Clark's, she'd never know. She supposed it was because of the chronic shortage of labour, as so many young men were away fighting in the trenches. But they didn't trust him with a skilled job anymore. So he spent his days doing menial tasks like sweeping the yards, cleaning windows, and ferrying goods between the different departments on a handcart. Kate suspected he was pilfering things from the factory, because she couldn't see how his reduced earnings could pay the bills and still leave anything over for his beloved cider. She knew that he was still drinking, because some people delighted in telling her about the fights he got into at the street inn. And now the house he rented from their employers, where Kate and her siblings had been born and their beloved Ma had died, was ablaze. Smoke and flames poured from the windows, lighting up the area around the building. People were passing buckets of water hand to hand in an effort to quench the flames. The village fire engine had arrived, and the firefighters were aiming their hoses at the building, but it was clear that the Davis home was beyond help. Kate stood on the edge of the crowd, watching, as the man in charge directed the firefighters to dampen down the neighbouring buildings in an effort to save them. Auntie Betty put an arm around her. All of Kate's old neighbours were out on the street, everyone doing what they could to help fight the fire. "Where is he?" she asked. "I can't see Pa anywhere." "He'll be around somewhere, lass," said Betty, "although I wouldn't put it past him and that floozy to have run off rather than face the consequences of their drunken foolishness." A woman standing next to them shook her head. "They're still in there," she said, pointing to the blazing house. "I'm sorry, Katie lass, but I don't think anyone has come out." Betty gasped as Kate felt a chill run down her from head to toe. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I mean, were they even there? They could have been out carousing for all anyone knows." They often left the children on their own, she knew. The chill in her body got worse, even as she felt the heat from the flames on her face. She disliked those children almost as much as she loathed their mother. They were little beasts who'd made her life a misery. They had a newborn as well. Kate hadn't seen it, but she'd heard it was a boy. But she would never wish them dead. If Pa and the floozy had run off and left the little ones inside, there was no hope for them. She didn't want this sort of fate for the children, no matter what. The woman shook her head again, unable to look Kate in the eye. "I heard screaming and your Pa shouting. I thought they were just having another fight. Lord knows they have 'em regular enough. But then we smelt the smoke. I'm sorry, lass. By the time we came out to see, the fire was too fierce for anyone to go in there to get 'em out." Kate closed her eyes. Even the wickedest folk didn't deserve to die like this. Yet she couldn't believe it to be true. She felt sure they would all appear once the excitement died down, unharmed and the same as ever. Maybe this would be a good thing for them, show them the error of their ways. Lord knows those children deserved better. "Should I go round and tell Ada and Vi?" she asked Auntie Betty. Her sisters-in-law both lived around the corner in Goswell Road. Their husbands, Kate's brothers, were both away in the trenches. None of them would be concerned about the fate of the adult occupants of the Davis family home, but she felt they should know. The older woman shook her head. "Leave them be, lass. They've got their babies to think of, so they won't be able to rush round here. Chances are somebody has already knocked on their doors, like that lad did for us. We'll go and let them know what's what when we know for sure." Kate nodded. Betty was thinking the same as she was, expecting the family to appear like phoenixes out of the ashes. They would have an excuse for how the fire had started. All lies, of course. Someone else would be blamed, even though every decent soul in the village knew Pa and the floozy lied about everything. She took a deep breath. No matter. Whether Pa and his second family were alive or dead, it was nothing to her. She could only hope that, with the house reduced to ashes, they would finally leave Street, never to return. "I feel like I should be doing something," Kate murmured, as people moved around, hauling water or helping to rescue furniture and belongings from the neighbouring houses in case the fire spread along the terrace. But I don't know what. She felt strangely lethargic, as though she were in a dream, that none of this was real, even though the air was full of choking smoke that made her chest tight, and her skirt and shoes were damp from the water that had slopped from buckets as people rushed past them. There are plenty doing their best. There's nothing for you to do, love. I think you'd best be getting over to that constable over there. A stern-faced police officer was surveying the scene, making notes and asking questions of the people standing around him. I reckon he's the one who sent the lad for you. Best find out what he's wanting. When did you last see your pa? He asked after she approached him and identified herself. She shrugged. Weeks ago, she said. Even then we didn't talk. In truth, she made sure to stay well away from anywhere he might be. I've not lived here in over a year. She lodges with me because he mistreated her so, said Auntie Betty, who remained steadfast by her side. And that man carried on attacking her even then. He was locked up for a few weeks for setting about her in front of witnesses a while back. You'll have it in your records. Kate shivered as she remembered the day when Pa had grabbed her by her hair in the high street, demanding her purse and telling her he was taking her home to be his skivvy again. She'd been rescued by her friend Jeannie's brother Peter, who'd given her attacker a black eye before the constable had arrived and taken him off to jail. The constable nodded, his expression grim. We know Reggie Davis well enough, ma'am. Is he dead? Asked Kate. He shrugged. No one knows for sure, lass. But if he's in there, he will be, he said. Neighbours reported hearing shouts, but they might have escaped. No one's seen him, though, nor the rest of them. There's no point in looking for him until first light, and even then, I reckon we should search what's left of the house for bodies first. No point in wasting our time looking for a ghost, is there? Kate closed her eyes and nodded. She crossed her arms over her chest, trying to dispel the odd feeling of cold dread that shook her body, even as the heat from the blazing cottage scorched her cheek. Someone caught the constable's attention, and he strode off to deal with whatever it was they were telling him. Auntie's arm came round her shoulders again, and she leaned into the older woman. All right, Katie, love, she asked gently. I don't know, she whispered. If I wish him dead, does that make me as wicked as him? Will I go to hell? Ugh, come here, lass. Betty turned and pulled Kate into a hug. She patted Kate's hair as she buried her face in her landlady's shoulder. You're not wicked. You've been treated so ill by that man, it's only natural you should want him gone from your life. Don't fret now. Dead or alive, I reckon he's gone too far this time. He'll not be welcome around these parts again, that's for sure. But we don't even know if he started the fire. It could have been any of them, couldn't it? Maybe, Betty conceded. But don't you remember the time he knocked over a lamp once and set fire to your ma's best curtains? He was in his cups then, the fool. It was only her quick actions that prevented him burning down the house then. I'm not saying he did it deliberately, but Reggie Davis is a danger to himself and others when he's drunk. Kate couldn't argue with that. He was always a sour old beggar, but when he'd had his fill of cider, he turned nasty, lashing out on a whim. Kate had taken many a slap from him for just being in the same room. She wished she could remember just one instance of her pa being kind, or making her feel like he cared for anyone but himself, but she couldn't think of a single one. It made her heart ache. They stayed there through what was left of the night, joining the lines, passing buckets hand to hand. At first, Kate had expected someone to tell her to get away, that her family had done enough damage, but no one did. She didn't know whether it was because they knew it wasn't her fault and she genuinely wanted to help, or because they were simply too heartsore and weary of the fight to save the homes to care who was there to help. She watched in horror as the roof of the cottage collapsed and the homes on either side began to burn in earnest. She cried then, her heart breaking for the people who had been good neighbours to her and Ma, and then had to put up with the disgusting behaviour of Pa, the floozy, and their children. She didn't know how this fire had started, but these good people didn't deserve to lose their homes like this. Everything they'd worked for all their lives turned to ashes because of whatever had happened in her pa's cottage. She had never been more ashamed to be Reggie Davis's daughter. As dawn rose, the fire was at last brought under control. 3 cottages were destroyed. Others were damaged by smoke and water. "We should leave, lass," said Auntie Betty, wiping her forehead. She looked so tired that Kate immediately felt guilty that she hadn't insisted the older woman had gone home to rest. "You go, Auntie. I can't," she said. "There's nothing more you can do, lass. We've got a half-day shift starting in a few hours," she reminded her. It was Saturday. "They'll still be expecting us at the factory. We'll need to work, then we can rest this afternoon." "But," she sighed. She was bone-tired and wanted nothing more than to wash off the smoke clinging to her skin, hair and clothes. But she shook her head again. "I have to stay. To see if... I need to know if they're in there." She looked at Kate, her gaze a mix of love and pity. "All right, lass. Stay if you must. I'll let your supervisor know what's happened, in case you don't manage to get there in time to clock in." "I'll get into trouble, won't I, if I miss work?" she said, torn between waiting to see if the cottage was where her pa had met his end, and not missing her shift. She only had herself to rely on, and her wages weren't that good, even though she did better these days on piecework. Lads her age earned more, even if they weren't as skilled. It wasn't fair, but regardless of that, she couldn't afford to miss even a half shift. Auntie Betty shook her head. "Don't fret, lass. Bad as he proved to be, he's still your pa. If you need to stay, I'll speak to personnel and make sure you don't suffer on account of it." She ran a weary hand down her face. "But I've reached my limit, lass, so I'll take myself home and rest a while. I'll go round to your sisters-in-law on the way and let them know what's happened and that you're still here." Kate nodded. "Tell them not to worry. Their little ones come first, not him." Vi arrived half an hour later, having left her children with Ada. She rushed over to Kate, who stepped back, holding her hands in front of her when she would have hugged her. "Don't, Vi. I'm all sooty and filthy." Vi grabbed her hands, her anxious gaze running over Kate. "I don't care about that. Are you all right? I heard the commotion in the night, but I had no idea what it was, and didn't want to leave the babies to find out. I didn't know what was going on until Betty Searle knocked." She looked at the still smouldering ruins of the cottages and gasped. "Oh my word! What has that devil done now?" Kate shrugged, too tired to say anything. "What's he done?" asked a man standing nearby. It was their neighbour, Mr. Harding, someone that Kate had known all her life. His arms were around his weeping wife. His children sat on the ground, still in their nightclothes, soot-laden blankets around their shoulders, staring at their ruined home. "I'll tell you what he's done. That fool has gone too bloomin' far, that's what. It wasn't enough that he made our lives a misery with his drinking and carousing and fighting all day and night. No, he had to burn down my damned cottage, that's what. Look at it. 50 years my family's lived there. My grandpa got the tenancy when he was an outworker. Then my pa took over when he married my ma. Then me and my missus took over when they passed. 50 years. Gone." "I'm so sorry," said Kate, her tears overflowing again. The man turned on her. "Sorry doesn't put a roof over my head, Kate Davis. Sorry doesn't give me back what that pa of yours has taken from me and my family. I hope he rots in hell." "So do we," said Vi, her voice tight as she stepped forward to stand between Kate and the angry man. "Believe me, we've no love for Reggie Davis. You've no idea what he's put this family through, especially Kate. But none of this is her fault." She waved an arm towards the ruined buildings. "She doesn't even live here anymore. Hasn't for months." "Vi, it's all right," Kate said wearily. "Don't argue with him, please." She moved around Vi and approached him. "I'm so sorry," she said again. "I tried to help. We all did. If there's anything I can do—" The man's wife put her hand up to his cheek, stopping him when he would have started to shout again. "Don't, love," she said through her tears. "She's right. It's not Kate's fault. It was that woman. She drove the lass from her own home, and now— Oh, God," she sobbed. "What are we going to do?" Kate closed her eyes, shame flooding her as the woman fell against her husband, weeping. She felt so helpless in the face of their despair. That her own pa was no doubt responsible, whether it was a deliberate act or an accident, was almost too much to bear. She'd spent so long trying to drag herself out from under his influence, to get people to see her as a person in her own right, a good person who worked hard and respected others. But now she would be back to square one. She was Reggie Davis's daughter, and after this, no one was ever going to forget it. A shout from nearer the ruins caught everyone's attention. Grim-faced firemen came out of the ruined building. Everyone who remained outside the burnt cottages froze as they waited to hear the latest news. One of them spoke to the weary-looking constable. He asked a couple of questions which had the fireman shaking his head. With a sigh, he turned, his gaze catching Kate's. "A woman, 2 children and an infant have died here. But there's no sign of Reggie Davis," he announced. Kate felt as though her heart had stopped. She couldn't breathe as he went on. "It's therefore safe to assume that he is a fugitive, and likely responsible for the deaths of these souls." "Oh, dear God," muttered Vi. "Now he's gone and killed them, the stupid, horrible man. He'll hang for sure." Kate hung her head and closed her eyes, willing her lungs to work again. She pulled in a painful breath, shame flooding her. She was only grateful her poor dear Ma wasn't here to witness this. She wouldn't let herself think about the relief flooding her at the knowledge that the floozy was dead and couldn't torment her ever again. That woman had been so cruel to Kate, nearly choking her to death once. If Jeannie hadn't been there, she would have been dead for sure. But she couldn't help feeling sick to her stomach that those little ones had suffered such a fate. They hadn't deserved that any more than they deserved such terrible parents.
"Where is he?"
someone shouted.
"Well, hunt him down, the murdering so-and-so. He's got to pay for all of this."
Kate didn't look up. She knew that, like her, they were more angry about the destruction of the homes than the death of the floozy, who with Pa had made their lives a misery, but to cause the death of such young ones was beyond the pale. The children had been unpopular as well, but she knew these good people would acknowledge that they were under their mother's bad influence. None of them would wish them such a terrible death. She felt a pang of regret that the baby, born just a few months ago, would never have the chance to experience life. It had been too young to have been corrupted by the rest of its family yet, a true innocent. She couldn't mourn Pa and the floozy, if he had indeed perished in the fire, although that added a new level of shame on her heart. As a God-fearing person, she should have been able to forgive them for their ill treatment of her, but she couldn't. The wounds they had inflicted on her body and mind were too deep and too raw. "Where on earth could he have gone?" whispered Vi. "He's got no friends round here." Fear filled Kate. "What if he's gone to Ada's? Or Auntie Betty's? Should we go and make sure they're all right?" The idea that Pa might harm more women and children terrified her. Another shout came from the back of the cottages.
"We've got him!"
Men ran towards the noise. "Phew," said Vi, resting her hand over her heart. "Thank goodness for that. I was ready to run home and grab my biggest skillet to hit him with if he got anywhere near my little ones. Looks like I won't end up having his blood on my hands after all. Shame." Kate put her hand over her mouth, trying to stifle the hysterical laugh that escaped. I was going to grab one of those bricks from the rubble pile. That'd do the trick, her sister-in-law agreed, her tone matter-of-fact, as though they were talking about the best way to remove a stain. But thankfully we won't be called upon to do violence. The constables can sort him out. They watched as Reggie was dragged forward. He was pale and looked confused. Dried blood matted his hair. His clothes were scorched, and his hands were red and blistered. He didn't try to fight off his captors, nor did he seem to notice the destruction around him. "He was passed out in the outhouse," said one of the men who was holding him up. "Looks like he crawled there." He pointed to the mud and grime on Pa's trousers. "Drunk as usual," spat one of the women in the crowd. "Crawled there like the filthy worm he is. I hope they hang him high." "What?" Pa looked up and seemed to notice the people standing there for the first time. "What's gone on?" The silence that greeted his question chilled Kate. She couldn't look at him. Had he been so drunk he hadn't known he'd killed the Floozy and their children? Or was this all the Floozy's fault? Lord knows, Kate had learned the painful lesson that the woman was capable of anything. "You're coming with us, Reggie. You'll be going before the magistrate as soon as we can arrange it." Reggie shook his head as though trying to clear it. "What are you talking about? I ain't done nothing." At the jeers of some of the crowd, he looked around, noting at last the destruction of his and his neighbours' homes. "What the hell? Who did this?" he demanded. "You did, you drunken fool!" screamed one woman. "You killed your own family and nearly killed us in our beds." Kate cringed as he began to protest, declaring he didn't know what they were talking about, trying to get out of taking responsibility for his actions as usual. It didn't matter to his neighbours if he'd done it deliberately or by accident, or even if it was his fault at all. He'd caused enough trouble for all of them for too long. She turned away, unable to bear it. "I've got to get to work," she said. Vi put a hand on her arm to stop her. "Betty's telling Mr. Briers what's been going on. They won't be expecting you in today." Kate shrugged, her gaze on the sodden ground. "I've no excuse, have I? He's still alive. Even if he was dead, I don't believe it would be reason enough for me to miss work in the circumstances. I'd better get on." She kissed Vi's cheek, urging her to go home to her babies. She didn't look back at Pa, who was being manhandled by the constables. The crowd jeered and shouted at him as they dragged him away. Chapter 2. On Saturday afternoon, Jeannie was in the bedroom she shared with her ma when her sister-in-law Louisa knocked and came in. "Are you all right, love?" she asked. Jeannie looked up from the book she was reading and nodded. "I just wanted some time on my own. It's not often I can be in here alone, with Ma spending so much time in bed." A combination of depression and arthritis kept Mrs. Musgrove bedbound a lot of the time. "But she's feeling all right today, and the twins helped her downstairs. She's enjoying sitting out in the garden this afternoon. She feels better in the sunshine." Louisa sat on the bed beside her. "Then is it the news about Reggie Davis and the Floozy that's upset you? Because it sounds like the rest of the village is rejoicing." She pulled a face. "It's horrible about the little ones, though." She shook her head, looking down at her hands on her lap. "No. I can understand why folk would be glad that awful woman is gone. Even though I know I shouldn't judge, that's up to the Almighty. But I don't want to think about the rest of it. Those children dying and their neighbours losing their homes. It's going to be hard for Kate, with people saying her pa could be a murderer, isn't it?" Louisa agreed. "So long as no one tries to imply that Kate is anything like him and the Floozy, because I'll soon put them right if they do. She suffered more than anyone at their hands. None of this is her fault." "I know. We'll all support her, no matter what." Kate, Jeannie and Louisa had been friends since they'd started school together, and looked out for each other through everything that happened in their lives. Since the war had begun 3 years ago, they'd all been through difficult times. Louisa stroked her sister-in-law's hair. But if that's not what's driven you inside on a summer's afternoon, what has? Jeannie looked away, her gaze catching sight of Lucas, Jeannie's brother and Louisa's husband, and his friend Tom standing outside in the back garden. She closed her eyes briefly before she looked at her friend. Louisa glanced out of the window, suddenly understanding. Ah, you're avoiding Tom, aren't you? No, she denied, lifting her chin. Louisa raised her eyebrows, but didn't say anything. Jeannie blew out a breath, her shoulders slumping. All right, so I am. I just don't see why he needs to come round here so much. It's hard, you know? Her cheeks grew pink under her friend's scrutiny. Louisa put an arm around her shoulders. I know, love. But now more people know about him being an amputee. He keeps getting asked to make other appliances for people, like that false leg he modified for himself, and the splint he made to help Lucas with his injured arm. You know Lucas and Peter are helping him. If it's any consolation, I think it's just as hard for him being here. You know he's mighty fond of you. She shrugged. And much good it does us, with him having a wife already. When Tom had first come to work at Clark's from his hometown in Northampton, Jeannie had been wary of him. He'd come to her rescue after she'd fought off a drunken attack from a lad called Sid Lambert. She'd been ashamed that he'd seen her like that, and a little scared by Tom's blazing emotions when he'd looked at her. But as time had gone by, she'd got to know Tom and found him to be a lovely chap. She'd begun to have high hopes that he might return her feelings, only to have her dreams dashed when he confessed to her that, although he was indeed very fond of her, he could do nothing about it because he was already married. That his bride had chosen to be unfaithful to him while he was away fighting, and was now living with his cousin as husband and wife, was irrelevant as far as the law was concerned. Tom was legally tied to the woman, which meant Jeannie couldn't be with him. She'd not live in sin with any man. She just couldn't do it. It would break her ma's heart. Not that he'd asked her. Tom respected her too much for that. It still hurt, though. Oh, Jeannie, I know it's hard, but there's nothing to stop the two of you being friends, is there? We all need friends, don't we? She nodded, sighing. I suppose. But sometimes it just gets too much to bear, you know? It's so hard trying to keep things friendly with lads. I thought I could get along with Cyril next door, but since I told him I didn't want to be his sweetheart, he's been a bit standoffish. I think I might have hurt his feelings. Louisa scoffed. He'll live, the toffee-nosed twit, she said. Just because he's a teacher doesn't mean Cyril's any better than any of us. I'm glad you didn't go out with him, Jeannie. He's no fun and spends all his time telling people what to do. He'd make your life a misery, love. She squeezed Jeannie, leaning closer to whisper in her ear. And he's not nearly as handsome as Tom, is he? She couldn't deny it. Cyril definitely wasn't as handsome as Tom. Cyril, who was lodging next door with his grandpa while he taught at the local board school, was pale and skinny on account of his asthma, whereas Tom, a former soldier, was an engineer at Clark's and was tall, strong and full of life, despite having lost a foot and part of his leg in battle. He didn't dwell on his loss, though, but simply got on with life as best he could. It seemed as though Cyril liked to demonstrate his superior intellect at every opportunity, such as when she hadn't read a book he mentioned when they chatted over the garden fence. It made her cross, because she read plenty of books from the library in the Crispin Hall, just not the same ones as Cyril. She liked uplifting stories that made her feel better in these difficult times, whereas he favoured Greek mythology and other such serious tomes. She found them depressing, full of unpronounceable names and gods changing into animals and the like. They just confused her, making her feel stupid. Tom never made her feel inferior, just sad. They'd shared one beautiful kiss, and he'd told her that if he was free, he'd want to be her sweetheart. But he was too honourable to lead her on, knowing he wouldn't be able to wed her. "I went off Cyril when he mocked Tom for his limp," she said. "What?" Louisa sat up straighter. "When was this?" "A while ago," she said. "I meant to tell you, but I forgot. But don't worry, I put him straight. I told him, our Tom's a war hero. He's making the best of things and helping others, never making excuses or feeling sorry for himself. There's at least half a dozen men around here that Tom and Lucas have helped now, so no one has any right to criticise Tom for limping, or Lucas for having a weak arm after being injured fighting for king and country, especially not someone who hasn't fought for anything." Tom had kept the true extent of his injury secret when he'd first come to Street, but eventually it had come out, and thanks to his skill at creating things to help other men returning injured from the battlefield, word had spread. Most people respected him for it, but clearly Cyril didn't appreciate Tom's talents. "Oh my, what did he say?" She shrugged. "He started spluttering about his asthma and that he was doing important work, shaping young minds. I told him fine, but that didn't give him the right to mock war heroes, or to act like he was any better than they were." She didn't mention he'd frightened the life out of her, making her think she'd set him off with an asthma attack when he'd started gasping for air after she told him off. Jeannie sighed again. These days she was polite to him on account of his grandpa being their next-door neighbour, but that didn't mean she wanted Cyril to be a close friend. She'd settle for being polite to each other, but he could barely manage that. "The more I hear about that man, the less impressed I am by him," Louisa said. "He might not be as sneaky as his cousin Douglas, but he's no catch, is he?" Douglas had been Jeannie's sweetheart a while back, but she'd discovered he was only interested in her so that he could worm his way into the Quakers and pretend he was a pacifist to avoid conscription. He'd been so convincing that Jeannie had believed him when he declared he loved her and was becoming a Quaker friend like her and her family. But he had shown his true colours at a dance at Crispin Hall. She'd found him in a corner, kissing Doris, Sid Lambert's sister, in a way that wasn't decent. She'd thrown some drinks over them, and Douglas hadn't been able to avoid conscription when it came into effect in 1916, because everyone had known about his deception. She hadn't seen or heard anything of him since, other than to hear he was fighting in the trenches. She pulled a face. "I know, but he lives next door, and I rather like old Mr. Baker, even if he is a bit grumpy. He gives us a lot of advice about our kitchen garden. We didn't produce half as much as we do now until he started helping us. He'll not be happy if I'm rude to this grandson, not after the fuss with Douglas as well." Louisa shook her head. "You don't have to be rude, just keep your distance from Cyril. But I still think you should give Tom a chance to be your friend. You've always got on with him pretty well, haven't you? That's why I can't understand why you're hiding up here today." Jeannie grimaced. "You're right. I suppose I am hiding. It's just that I've had another letter from Michael. The conscientious objector you've been corresponding with." She nodded. Both she and Kate had been writing to young men locked up for refusing to take up arms on account of their pacifist beliefs. "Even while he's in jail, he's managed to get himself engaged." Louisa frowned. "Really? How?" "It seems the daughter of a family friend lives near the prison and has been visiting him as well as writing to him. They've fallen in love, and she's agreed to marry him when he finishes his sentence." "Goodness. Well, it just goes to show that you can find love in the most unlikely places, can't you?" Jeannie smiled. She was happy for Michael and his young lady, but that didn't mean that she expected such a happy ending for herself. She believed she had found love. At least, she was fairly sure that it was love that she felt for Tom. But with him being legally wed to another woman, albeit an unfaithful one, Jeannie tried not to think on it too much, because she couldn't see how they could ever be together. "I know you're trying to help," she said, "but can we not talk about my marriage prospects right now?" Louisa gave her a sympathetic smile. "All right. I just want you to be happy with a good man." "Like you are, you mean?" She nudged her shoulder. "Who'd have thought it, eh? You and Lucas make a good match." Louisa laughed. "We do, don't we? I never thought I'd be happy again after Matty was killed. But, well, me and Lucas understand each other's grief, and that's brought us closer together." She glanced out of the window, where her husband and his friend were deep in discussion over some sort of contraption outside the open shed door. "I'm happier than I expected, thanks to him. He's a good man, and I'm so lucky he took a chance on me." Jeannie knew that it wasn't a great love match for Louisa, because she'd witnessed the romance between Louisa and Matty Searle, Betty's youngest son. They had been set to wed, but her pa had said no on account of Matty being a Quaker. Matty had enlisted and been killed in France, leaving poor Lou heartbroken and pregnant. She had run away to live with Matty's brother, who was married to Kate's sister, Peg. Once the baby was born, she'd had to leave him in their care, knowing they would love him as their own, as her own parents had refused to countenance her returning home with an illegitimate child. She had never been the same, but Lucas had been a good friend to her, on account of Matty being his oldest and closest friend. Then Louisa's pa had died, and her ma had sold their house and moved to Exeter to run a boarding house. When Louisa had refused to go, she'd been cut off without a penny. So Lucas had stepped in, and he and Louisa were married last October. Jeannie had been thrilled that her friend was now her sister-in-law, but she knew that Louisa's heart would always belong to Matty. It worried her sometimes that Lucas would get his heart broken, but Jeannie couldn't deny that their marriage seemed to be working well. Both of them seemed happy enough, so maybe she should stop worrying about them. "I don't know about that," said Jeannie. "I think he's the lucky one, and so am I. I'm so glad you married Lucas. You're the best sister a girl could have." "Oh, bless you. So are you. I've always wanted a sister." She wrinkled her nose. "I'm still not sure about having younger brothers, though. The twins are a bit of a challenge, aren't they?" Jeannie laughed. "That they are. Well, John is. Peter seems to be growing up at last. He's not as obsessed with football as John since he started his apprenticeship in the mechanics department. At least John is more content now he's gone to work for Ada Davis's pa at the haulage company. He never was happy at Clark's." She stood up. "Anyway, let's go and see if there's any elderflower cordial left, shall we? It's too hot for tea." As they went downstairs, Jeannie hesitated. "Do you think Kate's all right? Should we go round and see her?" Louisa shook her head. "Not yet. She'll be sleeping, having been up most of the night. Anyway, Auntie Betty's there at home with her. We can either pop round this evening, or wait and ask Auntie how she is when we see her at the meeting tomorrow." Louisa had left the Anglican church and joined the Quakers when she and Lucas had married. Kate had attended some meetings with Betty Searle when she'd first started lodging with her, but had decided to go back to Holy Trinity after her brother George enlisted so that she could accompany her sister-in-law Ada and help her with her 2 small children at services. Jeannie couldn't imagine what poor Kate was going through now. If her pa was convicted of murdering the Floozy and her children, as well as burning down 3 cottages owned by the Clarks, the chances were he'd be facing the gallows. She felt sick at the thought of it. She couldn't imagine how Kate must be feeling. "All right," she said. "We can pop round later. If she's still resting, we can see her tomorrow." In the kitchen, Louisa made up a jug of elderflower cordial and put it on a tray with some tumblers. "There's some sponge cake in the pantry," said Jeannie. "Lovely." Louisa smiled as she picked up the tray. "I'll take these outside. You follow along with the cake." Jeannie took her time, collecting the cake, a knife and some plates. She was still nervous about seeing Tom. She always had such a bittersweet feeling when he was around these days. Happy to see him, but disappointed and frustrated that nothing would ever come of it. It was like a physical pain sometimes, and she didn't know how long she could bear it. But she knew she'd rather see him and feel the pain than not see him at all. so she took a deep breath and found a tray to carry everything outside. But before she could pick it up, the back door opened and Tom stepped inside. "Jeannie." He nodded at her. Jeannie nodded back, feeling her cheeks warm. She wondered briefly whether her gaze was as hungry on him as his seemed to be on her, before she blinked and looked away. "I'm just bringing out the cake," she said. "It's only a sponge, but it's got to be eaten." "Louisa said. I came to carry the tray for you." "It's all right, I can manage," she said, smiling despite herself at the thought that he wanted to help her. Her brothers were more inclined to let her get on with it. "I know," he said, smiling back at her, "but I wanted an excuse to talk to you. How are you?" Her blush deepened. "I'm fine, thank you. A bit worried about Kate, though. Did you hear about the fire?" He nodded, his expression coming somber. "It's a terrible thing. The talk at the factory this morning was that Reggie Davis is sure to swing for it." She flinched. "I have no love for that man, and of course he should be punished if he set the fire. But I can't rejoice in anyone facing execution. And I dread to think what it would do to Kate. She's already convinced everyone thinks badly of her because of who her pa is." He frowned. "But Kate's nothing like him," he said, earning him an approving glance from Jeannie. "Of course she isn't. She's just like her ma, who was a lovely woman. None of the family are like Reggie. He spent more time in the street inn than with his children." They were silent for a moment, each lost in their thoughts. A burst of laughter from the garden brought them back to the present. Jeannie sighed, looking at the tray she'd set on the table when he'd come in. "Well, I'd better get this out to them, or they'll be complaining." "Right," he nodded. "Let me take it. You get the door." He came closer and smiled at her, his eyes warm. She smiled back, forgetting herself as she enjoyed this moment. Then she remembered herself, and she took a deep breath. No matter how lovely it was in Tom's company, she could never expect any more than this. She should stop acting like a daft girl with a crush and get on with her life. She took a step back and walked around him to open the door. "Come on then," she said, sounding far more cheerful than she felt. "They'll be complaining if we take much longer." "We better stuff 'em with cake quick then. They can't complain while they're eating. It's bad manners." They were both chuckling as they went outside. "This is enough," Jeannie told herself silently. "His friendship is better than nothing." She knew that was true, but she couldn't get rid of the painful knot in her stomach at the thought. Chapter 3. Over the next month or so, Kate avoided going out in public, other than to go to work and to church on a Sunday. She couldn't bear to face the hostility towards Reggie Davis that rumbled through the village of Street. "No one's blaming you, Kate," Jeannie told her one dinner time, when Kate insisted on sitting in a corner away from everyone in the canteen. "I know," she sighed, "but it doesn't stop me feeling guilty by association." It wasn't even the fact that the police had charged Pa with murdering the Floozy and the children after finding evidence of arson. No, it was the destruction of the homes of the neighbouring families that left people so angry, and Kate feeling so ashamed and so terribly sorry for the families who had lost everything. She rubbed her eyes. It had been hard to sleep these past weeks. "I've been keeping myself busy, though," she said. "Auntie's been helping me, knitting and sewing new clothes for the families who lost all theirs in the fire. It's the least I can do." Louisa smiled at her. "That's a lovely thing to do. I think a lot of folks are doing things like that, giving them furniture and household goods, as well as clothes and food. And of course, clerks have rehoused them." Kate nodded, keeping her head down, not wanting to catch anyone's eye. It had taken a couple of weeks before her friends had been able to persuade her to even come to the canteen. She hadn't spent any money on food there, though. She'd brought her own, so that she could spend all her spare pennies on things for the families her father had made homeless. "I heard," she said, "but it's hard to start again with nothing, isn't it? I wish I could do more for them. Kate, love, you've got to stop feeling so responsible for this. It's your pa's fault, not yours." She sighed. "That's what Auntie Betty and my sisters-in-law say. It's hard, though, you know?" She glanced up at them. "I'm so angry with him. He didn't just ruin his own life, but all his neighbours as well. They didn't deserve that. And then I start thinking horrible things about Pa. I'm really wicked. I keep wishing he'd died as well, and that makes me feel as though I'm as bad as he is." The friends immediately enveloped her in a hug. "No, you're not," said Louisa in a fierce whisper. "He's a wicked person. You're definitely not. He made you suffer so much. It's only natural you'd want to be free of him for good. I can't imagine how you must be feeling at the prospect of a trial." "She's right, Kate," said Jeannie, her voice soft and gentle. She hugged her friends back, grateful for their unconditional support. No one had been unkind to her face in the past few weeks, but she'd seen people staring at her and others turning away to avoid speaking to her. Even worse had been the looks of pity. She couldn't bear those. "I'm going back to work," she said. "I know it's early, but I'm trying to get my numbers up to earn a bit more. I've nearly got enough to buy one of the families some slippers for their children." "We'll come with you and donate a few pennies as well," said Jeannie. Louisa nodded. "Yes, we'll help." "You don't need to," said Kate. "We know," said Jeannie, "but we want to. Even Ma has sent them some chutneys and some of our preserved goods to help them set up their pantries again. The whole village is doing what they can for the families, Kate. You mustn't feel as though the whole burden is on your shoulders." When Kate got home later that day, she was exhausted. She only hoped she could sleep tonight. She had just filled the kettle when she heard Auntie Betty at the front door. "Kate, love, are you there?" she called out. "Yes, Auntie. I'm just putting the kettle on. Do you want me to peel some potatoes for our supper?" "Not just yet, lass. You've got a visitor," said her landlady from the doorway. Kate turned around to see a constable standing behind the older woman. "Oh!" She took a calming breath. "Can I offer you a cuppa, officer?" He shook his head. "No thanks, Miss Davis. I'll not stay long. But there's been a development in the case. We thought you should be informed." For a moment, she thought her pa might be dead. The mix of hope and guilt was so strong that it took her breath away, and she put a hand to her chest. "What is it?" "Come and sit down, lass," said Auntie Betty gently. "Whatever it is, I'm sure it's nothing for you to worry about, is it, Constable?" She levelled a look at the policeman, as though daring him to contradict her. He waited for Kate and Betty to sit at the table. Then he took a seat opposite them. He cleared his throat. "That's right, Mum. Nothing for Mrs. Davis to worry about. But we've had some information that shines a new light on the crime." When he paused, Betty tutted. "Well, come on, lad. What is it? Don't leave the poor lass in suspense." He cast an apologetic look towards Kate, who could hardly breathe for wondering what this was all about. "Do you remember when we found your pa?" he asked. "His head was bleeding." She nodded. "Well, we thought he'd banged his head when he passed out in the outhouse, but the surgeon who patched him up said he'd taken a blow to the back of his head, even though he'd been found laid out on his front. At the time, we'd assumed he'd fallen, hit the back of his head, then tried to get up again and fallen forward." "And what did Reggie have to say about that?" asked Auntie Betty. The constable frowned. "He swears he can't remember. Not the fight the neighbours heard, the fire, or how he ended up in the outhouse." "He was drunk. He must have been," said Kate. feeling the familiar disgust as she remembered how he'd lose days and days of his memories when he was drinking heavily. "Without a doubt," he said. "He stank of cider when we picked him up. So we could only assume he had committed the murders and the arson and either genuinely didn't remember or chose to pretend he didn't." The women nodded, both lost in their memories of times when Reggie Davis chose not to remember things he'd said or done. "Anyhow, his head injuries and the burns he sustained to his hands and chest have been serious enough to keep him in the hospital wing of Yeovil Jail. The doctor there says he's not fit to stand trial yet, reckons the blow to his head has caused some brain damage." "Brain damage?" asked Kate. "What does that mean?" The officer shrugged. "We're not sure at this stage. He might genuinely have lost his memory, or he might still be pretending in an effort to avoid justice. But he's not himself. He's prone to episodes of incoherence when he doesn't make any sense at all. Other times he's been so agitated the staff have had to restrain him." "He always was a tricky customer," said Betty, looking put out. "I wouldn't be surprised if he was putting on an act to save his sorry carcass." "Quite," agreed the officer. "However, this morning we got a communication via Glastonbury police station from the authorities looking for a man named Walter Longstaff." Kate frowned. "Who is he? I don't know any Longstaff. Do you, Auntie?" She shook her head. "Not a name I'm familiar with around here. What's that got to do with Reggie's case?" The constable sighed. "It seems he's a seaman who was deserted. We believe he was married to one Beryl Longstaff, the woman who died in the fire along with her children." Kate gasped. "The floozy's husband!" She covered her mouth with her hand. "Sorry, I shouldn't—" He shook his head. "Don't worry. We've heard her called that, and worse, by plenty of other people over the past few weeks. And we had a number of complaints about the behaviour of her and those little uns prior to their deaths. She was well known to our colleagues in Glastonbury as well." "Of course she was, the rotten strumpet," muttered Auntie Betty. "I know we shouldn't speak ill of the dead, but honestly, officer, that woman—" She shook her head. "Yes, well—" He looked as though he wanted to agree with her again, but he cleared his throat once more and carried on. "The reason we're now interested in finding this man is because he jumped ship in Bristol a couple of days before the fire and hasn't been seen since. He was on shore leave, meant to be heading back out to sea as soon as the tides were right. His merchant ship has been working the supply lines for our troops. His ship left without him, so he's now classified as a deserter and a fugitive. The authorities want him found. His captain questioned some of his crewmates to try and ascertain where he might have gone, and one of them said he told him he was going to sort out his missus once and for all." "Oh my," said Betty. "I remember he got in a fight with them the last time he showed up, but we never knew his name." "That's right, Mum. The magistrate let him off light, given that he'd returned from sea to discover his wife had taken up with Reggie Davis in his absence. All the while still taking her husband's hard-earned wages," Betty added, shaking her head. "And pretending her children were his," said Kate, her eyes filling with tears. "When it was obvious to anyone who saw them that they were Pa's. That poor man. She fooled him for years, while Pa cheated on my blessed Ma." The policeman sighed. "It's a rotten situation, that's for sure. He'd have been better off turning his back on it all and starting a new life for himself. But, if this sailor is right, it seems that Longstaff planned to come to street to confront his wife again." Kate frowned. "Do you think that was what all the shouting was about on the night of the fire?" He nodded, looking grim. "It's possible. It would explain how your Pa got a wound on the back of his head, if he was trying to get away from this man. But unless we can find him, we might never know."